Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dallas Democratic Forum's third program for 2020. I'm Leslie Oshman, president of the forum. As some of you may recall, we kicked off our 43rd year in January at the BELO with our program on the crisis in the Middle East. Last month, we had our first Zoom call with an expert on election law and campaign finance regulation. Little did we know that we would be canceling so many of our planned programs this past winter and spring because of the emergency of the coronavirus. But we are here now with our second Zoom program, What I Would Have Told the President Had I Been Invited, with the Honorable John CREUZot, Dallas County District Attorney. I would like all of you to know that in July, we will once again have our very popular review of the Supreme Court session with a panel of experts. Please watch your email for that date, which will be the last week in July. We will continue to offer these programs free to our members this year in a Zoom format, as long as the BELO remains closed and as long as the COVID threat is still a danger in group meetings. Because this is a new format, we ask that you bear with us as we perfect our technique and overlook any snafus that might occur. Now, if you would please look at the top of your Zoom screen, some of you may be very familiar with this already. You'll see gallery view and speaker view. Please click on speaker view. Make sure you have that checked. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you will see a sign that says chat. After John has finished his presentation, we will have about 20 to 25 minutes to answer questions. Please feel free to write questions on the bottom right hand of your screen in the chat function after the presentation. Our Vice President of Programs, David Griggs, has already received some questions that have been submitted by you in response to our invitation. He will add additional questions from the chat feature. Please know that just as we do at the BELO, we will try to answer as many questions as possible, but we may have to group similar questions together and we might not get to every single question. And finally, I would like to thank David Griggs for arranging this program. He did a wonderful job. We are so lucky to have the DA speak to us today. And all I can say is the president missed a great opportunity. And now I will turn it over to David to introduce Judge John CREUZot.
Thank you, Leslie. I assume everyone can hear me. I would like to introduce our speaker now. Most all of you know John CREUZot. He is our district attorney. He was elected in 2018. He's a retired judge and award-winning lawyer with more than 3 decades of criminal justice experience. 21 years as a felony district judge. He was an assistant DA and chief felony prosecutor before that. And he is most known for his innovative work on drug courts, criminal justice reform, and evidence-based sentencing. We know him as Judge CREUZot. He'll probably always be judge if he's elected president or something. But we are really proud to have our very own DA with us today to talk about some of the reforms that he would like to have shared with the president had he been invited to that important meeting. So Judge, take it from here. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all the members and everyone who's taking the time to look at this. And of course, it challenges all of us, these new times and getting ourselves acclimated to new technologies. It's amazing what we can do when we're forced to do it. I think of the meetings that I took so much time. For example, the other morning, I did one of these Zoom meetings to the Park Cities Rotary Club, and it was a lot easier to do it here at home than have, gotten up earlier, shaved, showered, clothed, driven over there, etc. So some parts of this are not so bad. But in any event, I'd like to remind people of the election, November election of 2018, and how significant it was in a way. And I think we were happy about the result, but if we take today and look back on it, there was some things to be learned from it, that we were ahead of where the issues are today and what people are focused on. And in the past, the district attorney in the general election in Dallas County has been elected oftentimes in the last few elections by 50 point some odd percent, maybe 51%. And the mantra has been, I'm going to be a good DA, you can trust me, et cetera, et cetera. But we did something different in this last election, and that is we talked about systemic injustice, and we talked about mass incarceration, and we talked about policies and plans and a way to run the DA's office to have a positive impact on our communities of color instead of a continuing negative impact on our communities of color. We talked about fairness and equity. We talked about substance abuse. We talked about mental health and homelessness and poverty. And we said that we would come out in 90 days with a plan to address those things. Well, we didn't do it in 90 days. We did it in about 100, but we came out with a plan. And of course, some aspects of it took a lot of heat and continue to be misrepresented in the media, especially Fox News and the right-wing media. But nonetheless, we've come out with that. One of the things that I think if people who know me realize is that we've always kept the data, and we keep numbers, and we look at different things. For example, when we started Divert Court, we immediately engaged with SMU, with the psychology department and the economics department to do two studies. One, a recidivism or rearrest study, and the other one, a cost-benefit analysis. It was new what we were doing. We had no idea if we were being effective, but the results of that study showed a 68% reduction in rearrests for those who graduated successfully. And that is with a comparison group of like individuals. And then the economics benefit showed that for every dollar spent, we avoided $9.34 in just criminal justice costs. And even though that's a very robust number, when you say only criminal justice costs, that excludes any problem with hospitalization that may have been occurred, that didn't, that doesn't account for getting a job and making money, raising your children, supporting your children, et cetera. So if we had to include all those things in there, obviously $9.34 would be a small number, and it would be a much more robust number. But nonetheless, we took those numbers to the legislature, and we started down the road of doing drug courts across the state. In 2005, the legislature was told that we would need 17,000 additional prison beds. And there was a bipartisan effort to not do that, but Divert Court was the model, at least the philosophical and structural model for revamping what probation does, what judges do. We started talking about evidence-based sentencing for judges. We started talking about best practices for probation officers so they could help the person succeed as opposed to try to put them in the penitentiary. So there were a lot of things that came out of that, and we put a lot of effort and money. We built and put more money into drug treatment, be it inpatient or outpatient, and we developed a continuum of care. And so the result of that is we've actually closed 10 prisons and 2 more to be closed this summer. We've actually reduced the prison population by at least 10,000 in the state of Texas. And so they've had some positive benefits, but we still have systemic issues and systemic problems. One of the things I think we all know is that many of our young people gain an entry point into the criminal justice system with low-level offenses. That's a problem. We also know that people of color are policed differently. Those neighborhoods and individuals are policed differently from other areas of town. And we say that and we hear that, but do we have evidence of it? And so what I've done since I've been district attorney is looked at who's being arrested for the lowest level offenses that cause the person's likely first significant conviction or engagement with our court process, and it's marijuana. And what we have found, I'd like to put up now, and I'll share the screen if you'll allow me. Excuse my fingers, but this is an old computer, and my screen is down at the bottom. So anyway, I prepared this PowerPoint. I'm starting to present this. I'll continue to update it. What we've done is looked at across the county, but especially the city of Dallas, because that's 50% or so of our cases. Who's being arrested for marijuana? and how much is it? And we're looking at other implications of these arrests. It is my belief, after almost close to 40 years of practicing criminal law, that when you talk about the disparity in policing and the unfairness of policing one community more aggressively than the other community, that doesn't seem to resonate. So we've added some other variables in here to try to catch a broader spectrum of the public to get interested in this. And I think we're succeeding. So if you'll allow me, if I can do it. Yeah, for some reason, this is not doing what it needs to do. Let me see. All right. So let's talk about implementation of reform policy. What does that mean? You have to have a good working knowledge at all aspects of the system. Fortunately for me, you know, I haven't been just a prosecutor and I haven't been just a defense attorney, but also I've done that plus 21 years as a state district judge, and I've served on many national and state and local committees dealing with issues that impact our communities, from criminal justice to poverty to homelessness, et cetera. So you really need to have a good working knowledge of your police departments. In Dallas, we have about 40 filing jurisdictions. You think of the city of Dallas, but don't forget about Garland and Mesquite. Don't forget about DART. SMU has its own police department, et cetera. DISD has its own police department. So when we talk about filing of cases, we're talking about a lot of police chiefs and a lot of departments and a lot of different ways of policing communities. So you need a good working relationship and understanding of that. City government. When we talk about city government, we're talking mayors, city council members, city managers, and the police chiefs. State government, all the way up to, we get grants from the governor's office. We have impact by money that's funded to our probation department, impacts what we do. And of course, local stakeholders. One of the most important relationships we have at the courthouse is with our probation department, or what's technically known as the Community Supervision and Corrections Department. But the other thing that we've done in order to make our case, and like I said, throw in different variables on this issue, what are the demographics on marijuana filing? You know, I said I was very clear that I was not going to accept first-time cases, misdemeanor marijuana cases on people. Number one, it doesn't have any relationship to violent crime. It does not impact the safety of the community. That's one issue. But the most important issue is the dual standards of policing that we find across Dallas County, especially in the city of Dallas. And people of color are pulled over for different offenses, and their cars are searched, or they're asked if they have marijuana. And even as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago, I saw a case where a young lady was arrested, a woman of color was arrested for 1 gram of marijuana. You know, how much is that? That's about a Splenda packet or a Sweet and Low packet on your restaurant table, taken to jail for that. So we need to understand the demographics. We need to understand what the costs that impact that decision making. And what I'm doing now is looking at manpower implications that affect that. Because when we talk about 50% of your cases coming from the city of Dallas, we're talking about the Dallas Police Department. But, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about the police chief and the city manager. And I'd like to, you know, that apple, I'd like to turn and look at it and invite you all to look at it from different angles. You know, the police chief is appointed and the city manager is appointed. But the city manager is appointed by an elected body. That's the mayor and the city council. And even though these numbers and statistics have been given to them, we haven't heard a thing from them as a body. Some of them have responded positively. But the fact of the matter is, we have a public safety committee, and Adam Magoo, who's the council member from District 10, he heads that up. And Mr. Magoo has not shied away from having hearings about bail reform and criticizing bail reform. But Mr. Magoo has been given these statistics and we haven't heard from him. And there's a place for that. I think that public safety committee is a perfect place for the elected representatives of the citizens of the city of Dallas to study this, look at this, and share their values on whether they think this is appropriate policing or not. So that's why we're looking at demographics, cost, and manpower, and we must acknowledge the problems and work to restorative solutions. Now I'll go into more detail on that. So our office keeps numbers only as far back as 2015. The county helped us implement a data keeping system, and that's as far back as it goes. But what I want you to see is what the numbers look like as filings. Now, when I say filings, these are cases that are brought to us. I have no idea how many times people are engaged on the street. For example, that white, non-Hispanic, or Latino, those are cases that were filed. I have no idea how many times a person who fits that demographic category was engaged and found to have marijuana on them, but not arrested and a case not filed. And I'll share a story about that in just a moment. So we look back and you can see overwhelmingly who it is that the cases are filed on. And as you know, those numbers don't even reflect the percentage of the population in Dallas, the city of Dallas. Then we go back and instead of the raw numbers, we look at the percentages and you can see where the numbers are askew. 90% of the filings are for people of color, okay? City of Dallas is not 90% people of color, far from it. So there's this idea bandied about by many members of our law enforcement community and our conservative, politically conservative, or just some people, that says that we must enforce these marijuana laws and we must take people to jail. We must prosecute them because that's the only way we can get to reducing violent crime. Well, let's take a look at that. Those percentages of who gets filed on haven't really changed very much. And look, this idea that the crime rate has something to do with my administration. You've seen that bandied about by the Dallas Morning News. I've seen it on CNN, Tucker Carlson a couple of weeks ago. Somebody warned me and I looked at it. Just a bunch of nonsense, but still. But look at the violent crime per 1,000 people. It's gone up. It started going up in 2016. I didn't become the district attorney until 2019. If there is a cause and effect between arresting people of color for these low-level offenses, and by the way, let me go back. I should have said this. There's two levels of misdemeanor marijuana. Anything up to 2 ounces is what we call a Class B, like in boy, misdemeanor. And that carries a penalty of up to 180 days in jail on a $2,000 fine. Anything between 2 ounces and 4 ounces is up to 1 year in the county jail and an optional fine not to exceed $4,000. Now, I did not put this in this presentation, but well over 90% of the cases that we have are less than 2 ounces. And I have an intern who is counting up all of those less than 2 ounce cases. And my suspicion is near 90 or more than 90% are probably going to be less than 1 ounce. So anyway, we're talking small amounts of marijuana, okay? But the point is, this idea that we need to come down, stop, arrest, search, arrest, whatever, this population to impact violent crime, you can see that that is not justified by the numbers. It's just not there. If it were true, then 2015 wouldn't have turned into 2016, 2016 wouldn't have turned into 2017, and 2017 wouldn't have turned into 2018, and we certainly wouldn't have had 2019. So it's just not true. So in 2019, we had an uptick in all those things. Homicides involving a gun up 32%, domestic violence killings up 55%, The most troubling ones, of course, are domestic violence, because those are usually spur of the moment. Sometimes there's some history. Those are very difficult cases to follow and prosecute. Male or female, oftentimes the complaining witness on these cases do not give us enough information, or the police or us enough information to follow through, but we do our best. But those are difficult. So, okay, we have the numbers, and we're really, when we're talking about why did a person get found with marijuana, how, what are the circumstances? I've heard police officials say, well, when elderly people are complaining about kids on the corner smoking marijuana and they want something to do, want us to do something about it, then we have to respond. Well, yeah, fine, but actually that's not, and once again, we're looking at that, but what we see, most of these are traffic stops. Okay, in fact, in 2019, when DPS was here, where did they do their business? In the communities of color. How many people did they pull over for traffic violations? 17,000. Okay, and it didn't affect anything. In fact, they say, well, violent crime went down during that period of time. Well, violent crime went down during the early stages of the pandemic too. So there are other things that affect violent crime, not pulling over people for no front license plate, not putting on a turn signal, etc. But anyway, let's look back at these numbers. In 2019, based on the policies, we rejected 1,596 misdemeanor marijuana cases. We also, every case that was pending, in fact, I let the defense bar know, don't resolve your case, because if it was pending at the time I came into office, we dismissed that case. So look at 1,596 in 2019, and then look at the next bullet point. In 2020, this calendar year, through the end of May, the Dallas Police Department has filed more cases than we rejected last year. They're doubling down on this policy and on this approach. And once again, you can see who it impacts negatively, those communities of color. So this next number, $217, needs to be explained. Back in June of 2019, the 2019 legislative session, the governor, our governor, Greg Abbott, signed a bill into law that made a distinction between low concentration THC and high level. The low concentration is not enough to cause a high, a buzz, or whatever you want. And it's hemp is what it is. And of course, we've now developed a commercial industry from hemp of making paper and all kinds of goods and things that they can do with it. But in any event, prior to that, anything that contained any amount of THC was illegal. Now, anything 3% or less is legal. So the state had to, and private labs had to go out and buy new instruments. And then they had to train and test and validate the instruments, et cetera. So it took quite a while before these things can come in online and the substance could be tested. But what happened was the price of a test went from $125 to $217, a significant increase. And so when you take that $217 and multiply it times 1,623, you come up with, my figure is about $352 or more thousand. Now, mind you, we're almost to July, and these numbers are through the end of May. So that's our number that we have saved the city of Dallas. I haven't gone through and looked at other jurisdictions. Some have changed their practices and they're not bringing the cases to us anymore. But the city of Dallas continues down this road, continues with who they're doing and how they're doing this, these enforcement policies. But nonetheless, because of your voting me in, helping me become the district attorney, as far as the city of Dallas itself is concerned, they have not expended $352,000. Let's turn that apple a little different way, okay? We've talked about the morality of who's being arrested and who's being prosecuted. And we've talked about cost savings, okay? And especially in these difficult times for our municipalities, state, and federal government cost savings is going to be important and the outlay of money in the future. So let's talk about manpower, because I don't think anybody before I came into office ever thought about or talked about manpower when we do this. So what we do know is that when an officer shows up with that person down to the jail, it could take up to 4 hours to process that person in jail. The Dallas police told me 4 hours. The sheriff says, maybe not, but certainly 4 hours is probably our maximum, okay? And she would know better than I, but I'm gonna work with the number that the police gave me, and let's say up to 4 hours. Now you think about this. If we have a crime rate, a violent crime rate, and we don't have enough officers on the street, you know, one of the issues is, and we're starting to talk about, even if you have enough officers, are you deploying them appropriately to reduce violent crime? And we're beginning to talk about places like Camden, New Jersey. And I met that police chief who's now retired. He and I had a long conversation about how he reduced violent crime by 60 to 70%. He took the police cars away from the policemen and had them walk the neighborhoods and engage with people instead of driving by people. He had them engage with people as human beings, as neighbors, as friends, and they were able to have a positive impact on the violent crime rate. But they were there and not somewhere else. They were in the neighborhood. So when we talk about taking someone to jail and spending 4 hours in jail, that's 4 hours that that officer is not on a beat. If we talk about an officer who arrests someone of the opposite sex, now we're talking 2 hours. And two people, we're talking about 8 hours. And so when we talk about this, we know citizens complain about no response or slow response time. That's another factor or variable that I think needs to be considered in the continuation of this policy. So we could save officer time and resources. What's the option? Does it mean walk away from it and ignore it? Well, a lot of police say, no, we have to enforce the law. Well, not really, because police officers as young as 21 and 22 years of age make decisions every day about whether someone who they've stopped for speeding, they drive off, they get a warning, a ticket, or go to jail. So they're making discretionary decisions. One of those discretionary decisions that some of our communities have opted to do is to file a Class C, which is a citation, and the person goes to municipal court instead of coming to our courthouse and being arrested. And these are Class C offenses with a maximum fine of $500. So what happens on that? Number one, they don't have to test anything. And number two, they don't have to spend 4 hours at the jail. And number three, a Class C offense carries a fine of up to $500, and the municipality gets to keep that money. So there's a win on that. And if you just think that you have to hold somebody responsible for that, then you could certainly do it within the bounds of the law. You would enforce the law, and you wouldn't be just completely ignoring criminal offenses. So the other thing that we talked about was criminal trespass and the high likelihood that many people with simple criminal trespass, are people who are homeless and mentally ill. And so we just, does it make sense for these people to continue to be put in jail? And there's a lot of this community who thinks that that's the appropriate thing to do. Well, here's a case study on one person's journey through the system since 1999. And, some of my screen is blocked, but you can see the number of criminal arrests. I think it's 60 something and 40 something criminal trespasses. On my screen right now are everybody's pictures. So anyway, number of days in behavioral observation, that's some of the most expensive beds in the Dallas County Jail. But I do know that the number of days sentenced, I remember, is 1,500 days this person has been sentenced over the years for these offenses. Now, let's just stop for a moment and examine our behavior and our values. Number one, a homeless person is not going to gain a home by being in the county jail. And number two, a mentally ill person is not going to get better by being in the county jail. And so to continue this is just nonsense and folly to think that we're gaining something other than the emotional satisfaction of taking that person who probably at best could be described as a nuisance to the Dallas County Jail and spending these kinds of tax dollars on that person. So what are the solutions? Obviously, reforms and restorative justice. We're rejecting the marijuana cases. And what we want to do, and we have a plan on the table, but it's right now unfunded. We're working feverishly to find about $1.5 million, but we have a place in the city of Dallas that's suitable, and we have a $1 million a year agreement from Parkland to provide mental health services. We have case management, we have social working, and we can work with the city of Dallas to provide a pathway to a home and wraparound services for these criminal trespass people who are mentally ill and homeless. And it's called Dallas Deflects, but we still need to get it funded. We're working on that. It's surprising to me and a little bit shocking that the city of Dallas in 2017, we as citizens voted, as residents of Dallas County, we voted for a $20 million bond proposition, and the $20 million has been sitting there ever since, unspent, and just not, maybe it's gaining interest. I don't know what it's doing, but certainly not spent. And we have a solution. And think about this. We think that if this happens, that these police officers who spend that 4 hours putting these people in jail would spend maybe 10 minutes dropping them off to a location where they could get the help and services that they need and deserve. Once again, this is the bottom rung of our local society. These are the people who are living under the bridges and in the woods. These are the people who don't have a chance. And, you know, morally speaking, from a moral standpoint, what are we really doing by expecting to give somebody 1,500 days in jail over a lifetime and more, that's going to be effective? And it's just not good public policy, and it doesn't make sense. So once again, solutions, ensuring that prosecutors examine cases. We're working on that. We have examples of what works. Divert court, I went over that earlier. Those are the numbers there that you can see. And you know, what can you do? Continue to give feedback. You know, I would encourage you, if you live in the city of Dallas, if you're a resident of city of Dallas, I can give this to anybody who wants it. It's available. Send it to your city council member. And especially, even if you don't live in District 10, send it to Mr. Magoo and ask him to schedule hearings on this for the Public Safety Committee. He doesn't mind scheduling hearings on what are presented as failures of bail reform, which are not true. And he doesn't mind having hearings blaming me for the problems with bail reform, which I don't have anything to do with. Am I supportive of bail reform? Yes. Am I there and present in my office when the judges set the bonds? No. Have I asked to be and asked for a system to be put into place so that would happen? Yes. But if we can do that, if we can publicize that and have hearings on those things, why can't we find out what his values are and the values of the rest of that committee and the whole city council and the mayor on this very important issue of two policing systems in our city? Because these are the things, when we talk about the types of protests that are going on today, even though these protests are triggered by the most extreme cases, when we talk about the lack of trust, we're starting at the lower level of things right here. When we talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, I somewhat agree. My definition of gateway is different. I think it's a gateway to searching a car, and I think it's a gateway to a criminal record. And all too often it falls on the least of us, the poorest of us, and people of color. And so it's up to, I think, the elected members of the city council to express where their values are on these issues. Put this on the public safety agenda, and let's talk about it, let's deal with it, and let's come up with where their values are. Austin did it. Other cities have done it through their city council. They didn't wait on the police chief. The police chief implements policy that he or she thinks the city wants, and the elected members of the mayor and the city council. So I think we should do like other responsible cities have done and ask our city council to digest this information. Has this information been given to them? Yes. It's been given to the city manager. It's been given to the mayor, and it's been given to Mr. Magoo, but no response. So what I'm asking you all to do, and you all understand advocacy and how to make your voices known, whether you live in District 10 or not, send it to Mr. Magoo. Ask him to put it on the agenda. Ask him to respond to it. Ask him to be responsible, and ask him to justify continued expenditures. When we talk about defunding, that can mean a lot of things to different people. But certainly when we're wasting hours in the jail and not responding to calls for service, when the district attorney has saved the city up to this point this year $352,000, and when we see from the numbers that the arrest and this type of policing has no bearing on violent crime, then it's time to begin the discussion, and it's time to be responsible towards it. So with that, that's my presentation, and I'll take some questions.
Well, thank you, Judge. Let me unmute myself here, and hopefully this will work. Thank you very much for your presentation. I do have a couple of follow-up questions for you, and
Okay.
then we'll open this up to chat questions from our audience. You mentioned something very interesting to me, and that was the Class C misdemeanor option
Yep.
for typical 2 ounce or less Class B arrests. What will it, and of course, Class C, for those who may not know, it's the same type of thing you would get if you got a speeding ticket or a red light ticket. It's something you would deal with in municipal court or in JP court. Judge, what I'm asking is this: in order for the change to occur for small levels of marijuana to be Class C instead of B violations, what will it take politically? Is that something that's simply a change of police policy? Will it take a city ordinance? Will it take a change of state law? How would we accomplish that change politically?
Well, probably the most difficult thing, but achievable, is state law. And it could be in the next legislative session we see that. Once again, the vast majority of these cases are less than 1 ounce. The next thing that's easy to do is the police department, and once again, I think with input from the city council to express their values on this, it can happen as a matter of policy. There are some municipalities in Dallas who have turned in this direction. They have looked at this. They've seen what the cost savings are. They've seen what police time on the street has become now that they're not doing this. And they have opted to issue a Class C, attempted possession of marijuana. And let's be honest, you know, some people say, well, it's marijuana, and some very strict, and you know, want to interpret the law as strictly as possible, which is fine. But the fact of the matter is, hemp and marijuana look and smell and do everything the same. You only know if it's hemp or marijuana if you do the test. So it's certainly legitimate that you could charge somebody with attempted possession of marijuana, because illegal marijuana, because until you do the test, you don't know. And whatever the marijuana is in fact paraphernalia. You just choose to charge them with that offense as opposed to the marijuana itself. Police do that all the time. Prosecutors' offices across this nation do that all the time. People may be filed on for multiple charges, but we take the one that we think is most appropriate and go forward with it. And so, yes, it can be done by policy. It can be done by legislation. It just takes the will either way to want to do it.
Well, Judge, you just indicated some aspect of it is police discretion. And I noticed on your slide, one of them about marijuana by the numbers, excuse me, that between 2016 and 2018, there was a higher number of marijuana arrests than in 2019. And that was under the administration of your predecessor, Faith Johnson. But yet you also said that you thought the police were doubling down on the prosecutions. So my question is, have you noticed a difference in the way the police are reacting recently versus the situation that you found yourself in when you arrived from your predecessor?
Yes, I do. Once again, some of the departments are not arresting people. They're issuing these Class C citations. And obviously that has an impact on the number of cases that we have. It has an impact on jail population, because even if somebody posts a bond or gets a personal recognizance bond, they're detained for some, fairly large amount of a day. It could make the difference on whether they go to work or not. It could make a difference on whether they have a job or not. And that could make a difference on whether they have a car or not. And it could make a difference on whether they can pay their rent or not. So these do have implications on things. But yes, I've seen that once again, that the community, some of our municipalities are handling these cases differently. And let me tell you another thing that happened on the criminal trespass. When I announced that I would not prosecute that category of cases, the homeless and the mentally ill, simple criminal trespass, there was one police chief who instead of arguing about it, thought about it. And that's Chief Spiller, Spiller, at DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. And what he did is retasked his officers and worked with, I don't know who his partners are, but instead of people who are acting out and being a nuisance in various ways, instead of arresting them for criminal trespass, he engaged with them and tried to find a pathway for something productive for them. One of the ways was less engagement. For example, if somebody's on a train and they haven't paid a fare, rather than arresting them for criminal trespass, they just took them to their appointed spot, where they said they were going, and asked them to get off the train. When it was a mental health problem, he engaged a team of individuals along with the officers to provide a pathway to help. And what he tells me his outcome is he is glad that he's doing that, because his officers are no longer stuck at jail booking people in, and they're actually at the stations and on the trains enforcing the most important laws that need to be enforced. And there's a presence for anybody who has a violent tendency or who's doing anything more important than that. The other thing he told me is that there's some facilities that DART has that needed to be policed, that there was crime on these. I don't know where they are, what they are, but because now that the officers aren't down at the jail all the time doing that stuff, that he's been able to retask them to patrol other areas, and the crime rate in those areas have dropped. But the interesting thing about Chief Spiller is he did this immediately on his own and reported it back to me, and he's very happy with his results. So the interesting thing about him is, what's his background? Chief Spiller is a career Air Force officer who was a C-130 pilot and rose to the rank of colonel. He wanted to do a C-130 gunship, and it was not available, and so he changed careers within the Air Force and went into security. He had a bunch of bases and facilities that he was over, so that got him into where he is. He came to DART as assistant police chief, I think, and now he's the police chief. But he comes from a different background of thinking through problems and looking for solutions, and it's showing that he immediately changed and he immediately has benefits. I've had some of the other police chiefs who are doing the Class Cs, and they have told me that they appreciate the fact that the police officers in their employment are on the streets, patrolling the streets, answering calls, and they have a much better satisfaction from their populace. So yes, we have seen some differences, and it all seems to be positive, what we've seen so far.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have one more question, and then we have 2 or 3 chat questions that have come in. I want to address this because it's such an important thing that's in the news and on many people's minds following the murder of George Floyd and the reaction of the various communities across the country to that. Last Sunday in the Dallas Morning News, there was a headline, top of the fold, regarding social justice in Dallas, an article about the coalition of activists who are calling for change. The document that they have come up with is called 10 New Directions for Public Safety and Positive Community Change. And there are a couple of things in that. I'd like to ask your view just in general about that effort. But 2 of the 10 directions that they're calling for involve the district attorney's office specifically. One of them is calling on the district attorney to review all fatal police shootings since 2000 and make recommendations for policy interventions that potentially could have stopped it and unlawful police activity uncovered. The other one is calling for the police to fire or furlough officers whose testimony is not credible enough to be used by prosecutors in court or have multiple complaints of excessive force. That's numbers 6 and 7 of the 10. So Judge, I'd like just to ask you sort of what you think about those that community list that the Morning News published and any thoughts you have from the perspective of the district attorney.
Well, the second one's easy. I mean, I can't make a decision on whether a police department fires someone. And oftentimes, these police departments are bound by their own civil service rules, and it could vary from department to department. So I really don't have any input on that. That's really up to the department. Oftentimes, if a person is deemed to be a non-credible witness on a go-forward basis, obviously that person's job changes. They're no longer on the street. They're no longer a detective or whatever. And they're usually given some administrative type job where they won't have to come down to court to testify. Oftentimes they resign, they move. We try to keep in touch with our surrounding North Texas DA's offices and county attorney's offices to let them know. We have kind of a cooperative agreement to let them know that this person has been deemed to not be a credible witness on a go-forward basis. So in case that person shows up in their community, they have an opportunity to make the same decision. As far as looking back at cases to 2000, it's interesting. I was talking to one of my staff members today about that and what it would take to do that. And with the number of staff that I have just to investigate ongoing cases, and the number of staff that I have to investigate conviction integrity, and of course, those are people who have been convicted and maybe innocent. I would need something from some direction and infusion of money from county government to make that work. I'd have to hire another group of staff to do that, to go back over that. You talk about 2000, things were not digital in 2000. Cases, sometimes the decisions were made by the district attorney's office back then not to take a case to the grand jury, and they may have sent an entire file back to the police department. Where the file is today, I don't know. 2000 is 20 years ago. Obviously, you have memory problems, you have the availability of witnesses, or even whether they're still alive. So it's not something that sounds as easy as let's just go do it. And I would need to have direction from the county commissioners as to whether or not they want to pay for that, to staff it. Because my current staff, I just don't have enough to do that. And as you can well imagine, as you're hearing, city, county, state, national budgets, everybody's putting out the word, the leaders, that your budget will be cut, it will be slashed. And so I'm actually trying to get ahead of that by making some management decisions ahead of that to try to stay in front of it rather be caught by surprise in this next budget session, which is coming up for October, is our new fiscal year. So in theory, it's good. Don't have any problem with it, but funding it and staffing it would, and then of course, just the problem of time would be the major issues that I see facing that.
All right. Well, thanks, Judge. Let's go to some Zoom chat questions that some of our audience have put forward. And let's see how many of these we can do quickly here. The first question, can you talk about the changes in the DA's office since Craig Watkins was DA in terms of investigating police-involved shootings? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, there have been some changes. So the number one, we're staffed up more, have more people. Number two, we take every case to the grand jury and let the grand jury decide. The most important thing probably is that the conviction integrity unit has been merged. I'm sorry, not conviction integrity. The public integrity unit has been merged with civil rights. it was reported at the end of Mr. Watkins's term, and I don't know, I'm just telling you what was reported in the newspaper, that the Civil Rights Division was actually one retired police officer. And he reported that he wasn't really doing anything. It was just a division in name. And so really, when we talk about civil rights, we really didn't see any difference between public integrity and police actions and what we see as civil rights issues. So I've merged those two together, and instead of having two heads working on the same cases, we have one chief of that section. And so we staff that. We take cases to the grand jury, all the cases to the grand jury, and let them decide. So did I answer your question on that, I think?
Yes, thank you for addressing that. We have another question from one of our audience about where does Mayor Johnson stand on your ideas? The mayor, the city council, even the county commission, are you feeling like you're getting support for your criminal justice reform concepts from our elected leaders locally?
County commissioners, each one 100%. The mayor, haven't heard from him, so I have no idea where he stands on any of this. It's been presented to him. It's been made available. Haven't heard from him.
Well, with regard to your Deflect program, we have a question. Have you spoken to Jim Schutz about Deflect and Mr. Magoo, Councilmember Magoo? They he just joined D Magazine, apparently.
Well, I saw that. He and I talked about his so-called retirement. Looks like he's out of retirement. So I don't think that Schutz and I have had that discussion. And I don't know. Yes, I've had a short discussion about that with Mr. Magoo, but it was back several months ago. I don't know if you all recall this, but I don't know. One day of the week, the city manager and his staff came out with a proposal to put a homeless facility of some sort in Council District 10, which is his. And that thing got shot down so fast that it hardly had time to raise up and take a breath. And we talked about that and talked about providing for the homeless and the mentally ill. I don't know that we put it in the context of criminal trespass cases, but you know, he did call me before his committee back when I announced these reforms and you know, kind of grilled me on everything and all of that. And part of this, his approach was that nobody knew I was going to do this. And I had to remind him that I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars campaigning on these issues, including the criminal trespass, the marijuana, et cetera. And I won the vote, the 60% of the vote. So I seriously doubted that this came as a surprise to anyone. But you know, I've talked to the city manager, assistant city manager about this and about this $20 million and the availability of it. Casey Thomas is in favor and is willing to share some, I think, some monies that he has available to him, some discretionary funds. But my understanding is that's like $80,000. I mean, it doesn't even get you started. And so the greater conversation needs to be had, I think, in the context of public policy and where this city is going morally and economically and manpower-wise on these issues, including how we handle the homeless and the mentally ill. I think it's just a greater conversation that needs to be had.
Well, Judge, I want to turn to another question here. This question comes from a mutual friend of ours, a father and former client of yours. You can probably guess who it is. It has to do with marijuana rehab. The question is, can you address how successful marijuana rehab is? What keeps the same people from repeating marijuana misdemeanors? And if possible, what do you think what does successful rehab require?
Well, I think when you talk about success and you talk about substances, be it alcohol, marijuana, or anything else, mind-altering substance, I mean, when you talk about success, it may be in degrees. I mean, for example, somebody who smokes marijuana all day, every day is very unlikely to be a productive person because they're high all day. But on the other hand, if you can have an intervention, be it an inpatient, an outpatient, or just what we call a cognitive behavioral therapy, which is more counseling and maybe group sessions, and maybe the person isn't smoking every day, but smokes on holidays, then have you eliminated it completely? No. Have you achieved harm reduction? Yes. Is a person more likely to be productive? Yes. So, it depends on, once again, your definition of success. But I've always started as a judge and in my private practice with a full assessment. And I think that those who know me and have had any dealings with me, especially in private practice, I really didn't handle my private practice any different with my clients than I did with individuals who were before me. They deserve the same thing for me to make the correct decisions or help guide them. And that is a complete assessment to find out what the issues and problems are. Sometimes somebody is drinking or using meth or heroin or cocaine or marijuana or whatever it is to mask or to medicate some other problem. And if you don't know what the other problem is, you'll never get to the bottom of it and stop that behavior. So it depends on what the person's profile is as to what it is to achieve success for them. And even success doesn't necessarily mean complete abstinence, but it may mean harm reduction. I mean, I know people in my family who would drink a bottle of whiskey a day. Well, you can't function very well. Gone through treatment. Do they still imbibe alcohol? Yes. It may be a light beer. It may be a wine cooler. It may be one or two light beers in a wine cooler. But are they functioning at a higher, more appropriate level? Yes. Is their behavior more appropriate? Yes. Is their relationship with us more appropriate? Absolutely. And so even though we haven't achieved complete abstinence, in a way, we're so far around the bases. I mean, we're just about to slide on the home plate. And so we take that. And so once again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, what the underlying issues and problems are as to your pathway to success or almost success with individuals who are using substances.
Thank you. Well, we're getting close to 1 o'clock and we want to conclude shortly. We have just one or two more questions. One person has asked a interesting reform question, and it has to do with a program apparently out of Richmond, California, where they are identifying the tiny number of people who commit 90% of the crimes.
Yes.
And paying them not to commit a crime. Have you heard about this type of program, and what do you think of it?
I have not heard of that. I do agree, and I think all of us in law enforcement agree that a tremendous amount of crime is committed by a few people. And I haven't heard of this paying them not to commit a crime. That's interesting. I'd like to see that happen in Dallas, Texas, but at least try and see what happens. But what we are doing, what we're finding today is a lot of the violent offenses are committed by gangs and gang members, and who happen oftentimes to be juveniles or young adults. Sometimes we have track records of who they are. And one of the approaches is, which I think is okay, but not enough, is to prosecute them to the fullest. The problem is when you do that, you're allowing them to commit an offense and to create a victim and to create the harm and the pain that those types of offenses. And I think that should be included with that is an intervention. And before the pandemic occurred, we had a group of individuals and we had identified someone who is doing a very good job with very high-risk youth in specific schools and turning them around with evidence-based strategies. And so we were about to embark on that program in one of our Project Safe neighborhoods, and with an elementary school there, that unfortunately these children have to walk through these gang members and walk through the environment that they've created. And so we wanted to get involved and engage from the district attorneys and law enforcement standpoint. We wanted to support these entities to help these children not become gang members. You know, if you're just standing around waiting for them to commit a crime so you can prosecute them, in a way, you've lost the war, because you're going to allow someone to be hurt or killed or brutalized, and then you're going to jump on it and try to fill up the penitentiary. And certainly we need to do that. But I think once again, as you know from my background, I try to jump ahead of everything and try to stop a problem before it becomes a problem. And that way we reduce costs, we reduce victimization, and we have a better, more whole community. And so I think that that needs to be included in this. I don't know about the payment part. You know, that's something we can look into. I don't know who funded in Dallas, but we can certainly try.
Well, thank you. In conclusion, we have a couple of comments here from people who say you actually did what you said you would do when you ran, and you know, we thank you for following through on your promises. And one other comment about the slides. I mean, obviously we've recorded this program and it's going to be available, but do you have any problem with us sharing the slides if someone would like to actually have the program?
No, I wish you would share them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us, Judge. And I think unless you have final comments to share, we'll turn it over to Leslie to conclude the program.
Just real quickly, that day I had to go before Public Safety Committee. I think I said this, I don't know, I was certainly thinking it, maybe I said it, but you know, all this about your policies, your policies, your policies, and certainly I think it is correct. You know, everything was okay after the election until I put the policies in place. And I think that was the problem, was that I actually did what I said I was going to do. And so whoever made that comment, the point is well taken, well made, and we're going to continue to do it. There are other aspects of the criminal justice system that we're working on and working with to try to help get a better, more just criminal justice system. We're working with our sheriff and county commissioners about jail population, who's in and who's not, and we're going to continue to move the ball forward. And I'll have more statistics as we get into other areas in the near future. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Judge, and we hope that you'll be willing to come back and join us again in the future.
Absolutely.
Leslie?
Thank you, Judge CREUZot, for a fantastic presentation, and David for managing the questions so masterfully. Please remember, everybody, what I said at the beginning. The last week in July will be our annual Supreme Court review with a distinguished panel. We don't have the exact date yet, but we will get that to you as soon as we do. Rumor has it that we're going to have some really terrific constitutional law experts, and this time they're probably going to be from one or both coasts. So that's one of the opportunities that Zoom affords us. Have a great 4th of July holiday, everybody. Please keep safe, and we look forward to seeing you sometime in the future. But in the meantime, we will keep in touch through Zoom. Thanks so much for coming today. Take care.
Thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome.
I will end the session and download the file. And I'm out of YouTube space or Vimeo space, so I'll put it on YouTube. And do you want it password protected or just up there?
I don't know that we need it password protected, Leslie. Do you? I mean,
I think it's fine.
It's a public program, and there was nothing.
Probably like it shared, so.
Great.
I think so.
All right, we'll do. Great
Just,
job.
if you could create a link for us, then we'll send it out to our members, and then they'll have it.
Yeah, you could probably send out an email with the slides and the link.
I wrote to Jim Schutz while we were doing this saying, have you spoken to John CREUZot about his Deflect program yet?
By the way, I didn't know any of this, and I thought it was really a great program. I thought he was really, really wonderful. This is like an idea I had maybe 10 years ago. It's like, why are we like putting people in jail for marijuana? It's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize like how stupid until I saw all those numbers, and it just seemed like a good
Well,
idea.
Bart, John was a former member of our board many years ago, before I even joined, 20-something years ago, right, Leslie?
Yeah.
30 years ago?
When I first joined in the early 90s, yeah.
Well, we thank you so much for your help and guiding this. I thought it went well.
Yeah.
Um,
I think everybody had to work well. Once I figured out how to switch people, I like fell asleep with the switch once or twice, but mostly got the person talking.
Right.
It's like old television, you know, cut to camera 2, cut to camera 1. And anyway, so I think it worked very well. I, couldn't have asked for it to, like everybody got on, everybody got off. I quieted everybody. It all seemed to work.
We had 3 VAD people on. We had Jim
Yeah.
Newton, we had Mark Perkins, and we had Carolyn Racer, Andy's husband. So
Yeah.
you're well represented out there. So
Good job, guys. Let me
good job from you. Thank you.
now. Okay.
All right. I guess we can conclude. Thanks so much.
Sign off.